Former prelate of the said this at the 80th birthday anniversary celebration of the former president in Abuja.
Other things as human that we can say Baba is not perfect. But one thing that nobody can take away from you, sir, is what I call pan-Nigerianness and pan-Africanism in you.
And President Muhammadu Buhari has felicitated with former President Olusegun Obasanjo on the occasion of his 80th birthday. In a phone call from London, where he is convalescing, President Buhari told the former military ruler and democratically elected president that a time like this provides the opportunity to reflect on Obasanjo's invaluable roles and contributions to the unity and cohesion of Nigeria, the brotherhood of all Africans, as well as peace and amity over the globe. President Buhari described the former president as a true citizen of the world. Recalling their days in the military, President Buhari said, "Those of us who served under you in various capacities recall a man with boundless energy, with razor-sharp mind, and one who does not suffer fools gladly. Working with you was a school in itself, and the lessons learned are worth their weight in gold." Chief Obasanjo wishes President Buhari good health, saying he stands together with him in prayers so that he can return soon to continue the good work he's doing for the country. Meanwhile, Nigerians have been urged to always pray for their leaders at all levels, as it is among the ways of redressing the socioeconomic challenges bedeviling the country. This was the central message during a prayer held in Jos for the quick recovery and return of President Buhari.
Besides prayers, we also need to be committed and dedicated in supporting the government of the day, because it is only through the prayers that God Almighty will be calmed down to ensure that we succeed in whatever the country is facing today.
To thank God Almighty for the relative peace that we have had. Our president is indisposed at the moment, and we are praying to God also for the speedy recovery.
President Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria, Bishop Ignatius Kaigama, has tasked religious leaders to relentlessly call for sanity in the equitable distribution of national resources in order to build a country anchored on true love and genuine service to God. He said this at the first plenary of the conference in Abuja.
Christian leaders must focus more on initiatives that promote ecumenical unity, speak in a united voice on serious national issues, and not in disjointed prophetic utterances, political or commonsensical projections.
It seems to me that we will need to invest more efforts into political dialogue, de-radicalization, and reconciliation strategies.
His Royal Majesty Ochiviri Professor James Ayatse Totiv V has been given his staff of office with a commitment to uphold the culture and tradition of the Tiv people, as well as foster unity and peace among them and other tribes.
We believe that he will play a great role in leading us onto the path of hard work, unity, honesty, godliness, and progress.
All I'm going to say here today is to assure you and assure the entire Tiv Kingdom that you have our support.
But we believe that the entire traditional system requires your kind of leadership. People who have seen it all, they have been through it all.
Today he is Totiv, and we must all come around him, rally around him, help him to move not only Tiv, but all Nigerians forward.
I will not be involved in partisan politics. I be the Totiv and father over all Tiv people, irrespective of political and religious persuasion.
And that's the news at this hour. The program continues with Claire and Kingsley after the break.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, Always remember 3 action words. Run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
So what's up, sweetheart? You really look like you're up to something.
I have a secret.
Okay.
I'll be going to Europe next week.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Like you have your visa, your passport, your plane ticket?
No, not that way. Some men are helping us. We pay them, they take us through the desert, we cross the sea into Europe.
The desert, the sea. Isn't that the route where many have died?
Yes, it is indeed a very dangerous journey. In 2016 alone, 4,900 people died while crossing the Mediterranean Sea to enter Europe. Many were Nigerians. For the very few who survived the journey, they are forced into prostitution or other crimes just to survive. Eventually, they will be arrested and deported to Nigeria. Don't be a victim. Don't go this way.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Coca-Cola?
Oh, it's happy hour. So, you want a free Coca-Cola, but you have to drink it here.
All right, thank you for joining us again. It's time for business news. And of course, we understand that the Ministry of Finance has, of course, created an assets register. This is, of course, to enable it to track assets held by ministries, departments, and agencies covering the last 5 years. Amina Noshim takes it from here.
The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, says the federal government has launched an asset tracking and management project through which for the first time government would be able to locate, identify and assess and evaluate all its movable and immovable assets. This was contained in a statement released and signed by Director of Information, Ministry of Finance, Salis Mbata. Similarly, a central asset register would be created and domiciled in the Federal Ministry of Finance for recording the actual quantity, value, condition and location of all capital assets belonging to the federal government. Under the International Public Sector Reporting Standards, government is expected to record both its assets and liabilities. The Asset Tracking and Management Project and the creation of Assets Register were new initiatives of the Federal Ministry of Finance designed to enhance accountability, promote transparency and deepen efficiency in line with the change agenda of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari. The Asset Register would afford the government to know and monitor in real-time online information on the inventory of government assets. A project coordinator has been appointed by the Minister for the immediate takeoff of the Asset Tracking and Management Project and the creation of the first Central Asset Register for the federal government. Meanwhile, a circular signed by the Minister of Finance has been dispatched to all federal ministries, departments and agencies, requesting their accounting officers to prepare an inventory of all fixed assets held as at 31st of December 2016 to facilitate physical verification by the project team. The circular further requested all heads of MDAs to ensure that any assets held by current or former staff were fully accounted for. The records of the assets disposed of should cover the last 5 years, and all accounting officers of the MDAs were to submit their reports not later than 3 weeks from the date of the receipt of the circular. And now a graphic summary of Friday's closing figures. And as part of its resolve to sustain the positive momentum in the foreign exchange market, the Central Bank of Nigeria again has pumped an additional $350 million into the market last weekend. This will take the total amount supplied to the market by the central bank to a total of $570 million and may further crush the value of the dollar. The naira traded between 450 and 460 to a dollar at the parallel market. The move, which is part of the central bank strategy, is expected to further strengthen the value of the naira. The acting director of corporate communications, Isaac Okorafo, noted that with the improved reserve levels, the central bank was determined to continuously make forex available to all genuine customers through their banks, advising those holding the greenback to reduce their losses by selling their dollar stock. With this, the central bank would have so far supplied a total of $570 million to the market. The Food and Agricultural Organization said access to food has been dramatically reduced in areas suffering civil conflict, and drought is worsening food security across the east of Africa, despite the robust global food supplies. In a report, the FAO said 37 countries require external assistance for food, including 28 African nations suffering from lingering effects of last year's El Nino-triggered droughts in harvest in 2016. Famine has been formally declared in parts of southern Sudan, and there is grave concern regarding the food security situation in northern Nigeria, Somalia, and Yemen. FAO said some 1,000 people were facing famine in southern Sudan, and about 4.9 million across the country were classified as facing crisis, emergency, or famine. And that concludes the business package. I am Amina Nujain.
All right, thank you very much there, Amina Nujain, for the business reports. Up next for us now is a look at the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
All right, Bayo at the base of the house, as usual. Bayo, hope you had a good weekend.
Yes, how was yours? Good morning, Claire. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
So, Bayo, a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
For today's review. Let's begin with the Daily Trust. Daily Trust, below the nameplate, says, Kano sues woman who gave birth day after wedding. Details of that story on page 4. NNPC and marketers under fire over 10 trillion naira subsidy fraud. Details can be found on page 3. And federal government orders ex-ministers and permanent secretaries to return assets. And below the photograph on the front page, the photograph, of course, relates to officials of the UN Security Council who met with representatives of IDPs at the Teachers Village IDP camp in Maiduguri, and that took place yesterday. NLG pays federal government lowest dividend in 10 years. That's on page 13. Buhari phones Obasanjo, salutes ex-president at 80. And CBN orders banks to meet forex demands within 48 hours.
All right, the Nigerian pilot leads with a report that says trouble for CCT chair Umar. Court admits statement implicating him in bribe scandal. That story is on page 5. And the picture insert there, Governor Rotimi Akeredolu of Ondo State and his wife, Betty, and of course other members joined an inauguration Thanksgiving ceremony at the All Saints Church, Jericho in Ibadan yesterday. Now, Kogi APC disowns Governor Bello, says he's a tyrant, kindergarten governor. It's trending just at the bottom of the picture story. Now, before I take the trend, okay, let me quickly take the trending stories at the bottom. Plateau FRSC to collaborate on road safety. And federal government tracks assets held by MDA's Great Assets Register. Of course, we heard that in our business report just this morning. 10% equity payment on mortgages below 5 million naira waived. And PDP youths meet determined to re-engineer opposition party. Now, Senate uncovers 10 trillion naira fraud in petroleum industry. Kingsley just also read that. Now, just a little below the nameplate, Nigeria, biggest imported rice consumer in the world. And this is a revelation coming from the federal government. Details of that story is on page 4. That's the outlook of the Nigerian pilots. All right, Bayo, take over from here.
Thank you. Let's start with the story of President Muhammadu Buhari calling former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Femi Adesina, the special advisor to the president, says that President Buhari called and described Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as a true citizen of the world. He recalled his military days and says that those of us who served under you recall that you are a man with boundless energy, with cessings to sharing, and more so, you never suffer fools. Working with you was a school in itself, and lessons learned are worth their weight in gold. Chief Obasanjo wished President Buhari good health as he stands together with him in prayers to return soon to continue the good work. Talking about return soon, Governor Yahaya Bello of Kogi State also spoke with the president on phone. This was in the presence of the Speaker of Kogi State House Assembly as well as some Kogi State government officials. And President Buhari told him, I am impressed with your leadership qualities and what you are doing in Kogi State and all your prayers and support for me and Nigeria. I'm resting here and will soon return home to continue our project of fixing Nigeria. But there is a doubting Thomas, and hear him. I advise the president to speak with me for the purposes of convincing Nigerians he is hale and hearty. This is coming from Governor Ayodele Fayoshe. However, at a special prayer session in Jos over the weekend at the Jos Central Mosque, a former Minister of State of Information, Ibrahim Dasuki Nakande, disclosed an information. He says, from the information I gathered, President Buhari is hale and sound and may come back today, that was Sunday, or tomorrow, Monday. So a lot of speculations still going on. Meanwhile, the acting president, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, is to visit Edo State, and specifically he is to visit Obem community in the Orio local government area. It is part of his sensitization visit to oil-producing communities in the Niger Delta. He is also expected to perform the groundbreaking ceremony for the Lagos-Ibadan double rail line. This is supposed to be a standard gauge. It is to cost about $1.5 billion, and it is for the distance of 156.65 kilometers. It is, in fact, the first phase of the standard gauge line from Lagos to Kano.
All right, Bayo, you're talking about Obeng community in Orion local government.
Yes.
You have a number of gas fields in that location. That's where the acting president will be visiting. Let's take a look at the Authority newspaper. Authority newspaper above the nameplate, that we already read a story on the recovery of properties from politicians and civil servants. Another one on page 4, Ponzi scheme, that's the kicker, Twin Cars takes over from MMM. Twin Cars takes over from MMM. CAF presidency, how I will defeat Hayatu, and that's according to Ahmad. Details of that story on page 46. Now, the lead story for the Authority has a kicker, alleged missing 10 trillion naira. Senate goes after MDAs and oil marketers and wants NNPC to account for 5.2 trillion naira fuel subsidy. The photograph there shows Governor of Rivers, Nyesom Wike, and others at a funeral ceremony at the weekend. Stakeholders tackle erosion menace in the southeast. That's the second list story on the front page of the Authority. Claire.
All right, Kingsley, Twinkers. No, that's another name.
Twinkle, little star.
All right, of course, let me take a look at the leadership newspaper, and it leads with the story. Low loan capacity. Experts seek 1 trillion naira recapitalization for banks. And it has to write, businesses resort to foreign banks full facilities. Now, does this speak to the issue, of course, that we have to talk about today? You need to stay tuned when we get to that, of course, segment. And now, take a look closely at the three personalities right there on your screen. Now, in case you can't identify the personalities, I'll help you to do that. Of course, to your left is the Speaker, House of Representatives. And the middle there is, of course, Sokoto State Governor Aminu Waziri Tambuwal. And you then have, of course, to your right on the screen, Governor of Zamfara State, Abdul Aziz Yari, all adorned in, of course, traditional attire, you know, of the thief.
Yes, Claire, that is called Ange.
Ange.
The black and white striped thief
Looking
dress.
very charming.
Yeah, it was at the traditional official staff installation of the Tortif, the fifth Tortif, Professor James Ayase. Governor Samuel Orton urged him to be fair to all subjects and all Nigerians resident in his domain. You will recall that the former Tortif died in November, and his selection, he was selected among 4 Ibusa clan members to become the Tortif.
Beautiful one there, yes. Beautiful one.
That's right. We already took the headlines, including the one on Twinkers, which is said to be
twinkle, twinkle, little star.
The successor Ponzi scheme to
MMM. If you want to reap without sowing, the tendency is you are risking your resources at somebody who is smarter than you and maybe do you in because the central bank and the Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation have warned time without number that it's risky putting your resources in those Ponzi schemes. Meanwhile, let's go to what happened at a court. A magistrate, his name is H.O. Amos, has ordered a journalist out of his court. It was at an Abuja magistrate court. The court registrar notified the judge that there is a journalist in the court, and this dialogue went on. Who are you? I am a journalist. What is your interest in this case? I have no interest. I cover court cases. I'm a journalist. I understand the court is a public place, and anybody can come and get information. The judge said, did you take permission from me before entering the court? I don't need to take permission, sir. I cover even high court, and I have never been asked to take permission before covering court. I agree. The court is a public place, but you did not get my permission. You think you can just come into my court and start writing whatever you like? If you want to write anything from this court, I must veto it before it is published. And the journalist, you cannot veto my story before publication. The judge says, then walk out of my court.
Is that a drama or for real?
It's reported in the newspaper. It happened in the Abuja Magistrate Court. Lord Denning once said that. In every court in England, you see a gentleman, he says nothing, he writes a lot. He's a journalist. His role is to see that not only is justice done, but is seen to be publicly done.
Kingsley, any comment on that?
No, well, certainly, I mean, that's not the norm, unless the hearing was in camera. And of course, the judge, the presiding judge or magistrate would have pronounced that this hearing will be in camera. And there are also conditions, for hearing the matter in camera. I mean, you can, for instance, the argument over whether the trial of the former NSA should be in secret or otherwise. Now, but if there are cases involving minors, cases involving them usually will be heard in camera.
The right to
the judge can say that, and then the court is cleared. But in the case that Bayo just indicated, no journalist is required to obtain permission from the judge before covering the proceedings of that particular court. But of course, a journalist is required to report contemporaneously and accurately the transactions in the courtroom, including the conduct of the personnel in court, whether the registrar or the judge himself, and of course the various testimonies that take place. But that's what it does.
Is there any action that the journalist can take with regards to this?
Well, this is only
well,
that's right. It's for the NUJ to take up.
The Nigerian Union of Journalists can take it up. The journalist is covered, provided all he reports from a court is covered by a qualified privilege. The moment he sticks by reporting in substance, true and in facts. This development is a challenge. It's for the NUJ to make overtures to the court and then seek how to resolve it. But it's not a good development.
That's right. It's not. No journalist is required to submit his or her copy
to anybody before publication.
That's what we call prior censorship.
That is censorship.
Censorship.
All right, gentlemen, I know that our time, for this segment, it's over. But just to add that the twinkers or twinkle twinkle thing, you remember, it's, there are no shortcuts to, getting wealth. But even if there are, like the Yorubas will say, ulewu, there will be sacrifices and risk and danger. So, of course, be warned.
Well, there was a report indicating that some 3 million Nigerians lost about, 18 billion. 18 billion. 3 million Nigerians lost. So this one is a new scheme. If you want to be, if you think you are smart by investing in hot deals, of course, you get your hands also
burnt. Yes.
All right, Bayo, thank you. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day. Thank you for having me.
All right, so that does it for our discussion segment. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll also be dealing with financial matters, insider lending in the Nigerian banking industry.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. Go to so let the change begin from within. Look at you, oh Gerula. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me.
Remi Abera is no ordinary woman. She's an angel to the millions of people who have been displaced and are living in substandard camps throughout Nigeria. We catch up with Remi to find out how her summit attempt went. And you never know when tragedy could strike.
We were 4 in the car. I think he must have got scared or something. And that's all I could remember.
NTA Properties Investment Company Limited, a subsidiary of the Nigerian Television Authority, specializes in creating comfort in all areas of life, such as real estate investments, that is, land, houses, and office spaces, mass leasing, savings and loan scheme, household items and car loans, and so much more. Other information and entertainment services include Property and Style, a TV program that airs on the network service of the NTA, and also Property Connect, a nationwide magazine. Our priority is to bridge poverty gaps and sustain quality welfare of our clients. Partner with us and watch us help you grow. Pay us a visit today at the NTA headquarters permanent site, Area 11 Garki, Abuja, or our Lagos office at number 15 Awolowo Road, Ikoyi, Lagos. For more information, visit our website on www.ntaproperties.com.ng, or you can email us on ntapic2000@yahoo.com. Call us on 080-2316-3474 or 080-6939-5185 or 070-3189-0555. NTA Properties Investment Company Limited. The much needed help at your doorstep.
I discovered something that took all my period worries away. New and improved Always Ultra has a comfortable top layer, an extra super gel for extra super absorbency. No stain, no check, because gel won't sleep.
Happy always.
You are watching NTA, Nigerian Television Authority. For more information and news updates, visit our website at www.nta.ng, or you can follow us on Twitter at NTA News Now, or you can like us on Facebook at NTA Network News. Stay connected on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/NTA News Online. Watch our live stream at www.nta.ng/live. NTA, you can't beat the rich.
All right, now we'll be talking about insider lending in Nigerian banks. What is it all about? And of course, what are the implications of this on the nation's financial health? And what does the law say about this? Let's listen in on Oyeyemi Ajayi's background report.
Parts of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 1991 as amended stipulates that a bank shall not, without prior approval in writing to the CBN, permit to be outstanding unsecured advances, loans or unsecured credit facilities of an aggregate amount in excess of 50,000 naira to any of its directors, and to any firm, partnership, private company in which one of its directors is interested, or of which any of its directors is a guarantor to any public or private company, or if one or more of its directors jointly or severally maintains shareholdings of not less than 5% either directly or indirectly. Also, the aggregate limit, as clearly stated in another part of the law, as it relates to microfinance banks, says aggregate insider-related lending shall not exceed 5% of the paid-up capital of the microfinance bank at any time. These are just some of the contents of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act meant to guide bankers and other financial institutions on insider lending. Recently, however, the Managing Director of the Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation (NDIC), Alhaji Umaru Ibrahim, when he appeared before a House committee to defend his organization's 2017 budget, revealed that bank directors are responsible for 40% of the 1.85 trillion naira non-performing loans or bad loans in banks. He also revealed that directors were responsible for about 40% of 139.45 billion naira bad loans in microfinance banks and mortgage banks. For instance, a particular bank granted various credit facilities to directors and other key management personnel as of 30 June 2016 of about 1.17 billion naira, which are repayable in various cycles ranging from monthly to annually over the tenure, and have average interest rates of 7.98% and a tenure of 4 years. 2014 statistics of the Central Bank of Nigeria shows that non-performing loans in the banking sector rose to 440 billion naira. Interestingly, this amount triples the amount budgeted for the National Assembly in 2015 and that of 5 states combined. Major burden of the payment of this loan is more on the innocent customers whose deposits and interest are made to fill the space for these insider loans. Insider lending in the country's financial industry has been a recurring problem so far, and how long will this continue, as it has a negative effect?
All right, Oyeyemi Ajayi, thank you very much there for that background report. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of what is happening in the banking subsector, let's at this time introduce our guest from the Just Network Center. Is Dr. Clement Adewole. Dr. Adewole is the head of Department of Banking and Finance at the University of Jos. Dr. Adewole, a pleasure to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right. In addition to the background report which our correspondent gave a moment ago, let's hear from you a brief recent history of abuse of insider lending authority by various banking or financial institutions in the country. I mean, we saw a rush of this in the 90s, and then, of course, just before the crash of the Nigerian stock market. Exactly what is playing out in the banking subsector?
Yes, that is true, and it's cause for concern. If you look at the statistics, then you will see that the figure is quite alarming, and it could lead to crisis in the sector. Between 2012 and 2013, the total non-performing loans was in the region of about 200 billion, and it increased to over 350 billion in 2014. But by 2015, we're looking at a figure of about 650 billion. Now we just got a report saying that the total non-performing loans is in the region of 1.85 trillion. And what makes this worrisome is that 40% of this amount is attributable to insider lending. And it's worrisome because we would expect that the directors, and of course we can also come to the definition of what we mean by insiders, we would expect that these directors would be experts, so to say, in credit policies, in how to come about credit policies, and also in monitoring and enforcing credit policies. But what we see is that most of these loans are actually attributable to insider lending, and a lot of these loans are getting bad. We have non-performing loans of about 1.85 trillion. That is 10% of the total loan portfolio in Nigerian banks as we stand today, as at the end of last financial year, 2016. What that simply means, let's put this in perspective so that I can guide our discussion. It means that for every 10 naira that is given out, 1 naira is non-performing. And out of this 1 naira that is not performing, 40%, 4 naira, is attributable to loans given to directors and other insiders within the banks.
Dr. Adewale, yeah, you were already cruising to indicate to us who insiders are.
Yes, insiders are basically the directors in the banks, significant shareholders, and the law describes significant shareholders as having shareholding not less than 5% in the bank, and of course in other companies outside the bank who are seeking loans. Then we have officers or employees of the bank. So we have directors, we have employees, and we have significant shareholders. And the law, Bank and Other Financial Institutions Act 1991, as amended in Section 20, subsection 5, describe who a director is. And you will see that the definition is quite broad. When we talk about directors, we are looking at not just the directors in the bank. We are looking at the director's father. We are looking at the director's mother. We are looking at the director's wife or husband. We are looking at the director's children and their spouses. We are looking at the director's brothers and sisters. All these are insiders. And that is the simple definition of an insider. But in other climes, we also extend this to look at companies that are able to influence the appointment of some of these employees or directors in the banks. They may not necessarily be shareholders of the bank, but they are also insiders. And in some other climes, this is also considered, giving out loans to them is also considered insider dealing or insider lending. In Nigeria, we're not really looking at that. So if we extend our definition to also cover such companies, and of course I know we've had some, where some companies from outside the bank would actually influence the appointment of some people into the boards of these banks. If we expand the definition to include that, then of course the situation would even be more grave than what we have now.
Dr. Clement Adewale, thank you very much. Of course, speaking to us from the JOS Network Center. And Mr. Tilewa Adebajo has joined us from our Lagos Network Center. He is also a financial expert and, of course, one of our regulars, and also seated beside him, you can see is Mr. Johnson Chukwu, another of our regular guests. Gentlemen, would like to welcome you to our conversation this morning. Mr. Tidewa, let me quickly take you up. Of course, Dr. Clement Adewale has just explained who an insider of course is, and of course went on to expand, mention other people who might be included within that category. And I also guess that he is also speaking to a term that is familiar in the banking sector, related banking. Now, by law, is it wrong for an insider, for a director, to obtain loans?
Good morning, Nigeria, and thank you very much for the questions. I think Dr. Adewale has given an excellent background as to what the contemporary situation is with the banking system. To answer your question directly, there's nothing wrong with insiders obtaining loans. I think we must clear that very quickly. What is wrong, the insiders have to obtain loans under very strict guidelines of the Central Bank of Nigeria has a corporate governance code which is put together for insiders, as you've called them, to obtain loans. And there are very, very strict guidelines that guide what sort of loans and the amounts that insiders take. And for instance, if an insider should take a loan that he or she might not be able to repay, what will happen is that the shares of that director or insider could be liquidated to offset the loans. So there are very stringent conditions, and there's a lot of recourse, I would say, to insider lending. And I think the laws are very clear, which the Central Bank Code of Corporate Conduct has put into place for insider-related lending. So it is, first of all, it's not illegal, and there are very special laws that guide insider-related loans. So the question now is that if the insiders cannot pay up these loans, what actions are the banks taking to be able to recover their facilities based upon existing procedures and laws and guidelines?
All right, Mr. Tulewa, just before we get into the issue of what the banks can or are doing to recover the loans, maybe we should also get the views of Mr. Chukwu. Mr. Chukwu, the quantum of insider-related loans is some 740 billion naira. This according to the CEO of NDIC. Now, this is said to be about 40% of the aggregate non-performing loans in the banking subsector. This would appear to be a worrisome figure, and if so, what could have slipped under the radar of the regulatory authorities while these loans were being accumulated?
Well, I think we need to look at it from a broader perspective, because only dwelling on the insider credit and this quantum of insider credit as a proportion of the total non-performing loan might be missing the point. Like, your question is, what could have gone wrong? We have to look at the fact that the quantum of non-performing loan has jumped over the past 3 years. We used to have, until recently, a non-performing loan portfolio of less than 5%. Now we're looking at 10% to 11.3%. So that is, we need to address that. That's the crux of the matter. What happened in the economy that led to the quick deterioration of credits? And what has happened over time is, we've seen, because the economy slowed down, the economy went into a recession, a lot of sectors became non-performing. Look at the oil and gas sector, look at the power sector. And these are the areas where credits were expanded. Look at the concentration of credits. So you now realize that, look, because we also saw a very fast deterioration in the level of credit, and that's also why the quantum of non-performing loans went up. Because if you look at, we have to address, did the banks breach the single obligor limit, which says that you cannot give more than 20% of your loans to a single borrower or to a related group of borrowers? Was that breached? If that was not breached, did they breach any of the prudential guidelines on extending credit to directors? If that was not breached, then it simply means that they kept to the normal limits that they should have. Like Tilema mentioned, the conditions under which loans are granted to directors is quite stringent. You have to sign off your shares at the point of seeking for that loan. Once the loan is approved, you have to sign. There's a document you need to sign which relinquishes your shares in the case the loans become non-performing. And I don't think any director would only want to give out his loans. You can't write off insider credits or director-related credits unless you have the CBN Express approval. If the director has to relinquish his directorship if the loans become bad. So these are conditions that have been put in place to mitigate the incidence of insider credit going bad. But the speed at which that quantity has increased, the speed at which we have moved from a 5% non-performing loans to 11 to 10 to 11.3% non-performing loan is a source of concern, and we need to address that. If we don't address that, we are just looking at symptomatic factors, and we're not looking at the overall cosmetic reasons why we have such incidents of non-performing loans.
Thank you. You've just talked about, of course, the rules and the law. Mr. Tidewa talked about strict, of course, guidelines by the CBN. And then one wonders if in 2009, for instance, certain, bank chief executives were arrested, basically, because of inside loans, non-repayment of the loans that they have taken. And if we have these strict guidelines by the CBN, we also have service delivery channels. We have, banks auditors, we have bank examiners, we have inspectors. Do you think that there is a kind of collusion, or is it failure, operational, failure by those that are supposed to perform these oversight functions?
Well, the way I will look at it is that there might be some slack in enforcement of those policies, but we need to actually do a forensic examination of what went wrong. If you look at, for instance, an insider credit will go to the board credit committee, it must be disclosed in the financials of the bank, and where a portion of it is non-performing, that portion must be disclosed to the extent that the individual borrowers will be listed in the public account of the bank. So if we have been doing that, then probably we would have picked up the signals earlier, so that there maybe have been some slackness in enforcement of existing policies. But we also need to address the speed of deterioration of credit in the banking system. And that has to do with systemic challenges. We have to also look at, we need to also segment the banks. There are a couple of banks, when we talk of 10%, 11.3% non-performing loans, we need to look at which banks have the higher incidence of non-performing loans. Some banks may actually be talking of 50% non-performing loans. Then, for those banks, the central banks should zero on them and find out their credit approval process. Did they have a stringent credit approval process? Was there collusion among their directors in the disbursement or approval and disbursement of credit? Did the directors have undue influence on the executive management? Or did they have a dominant director who had a pervasive effect on the other directors, so that they would have compromised the standards specified by the central bank and then the NDIC in the course of credit approvals?
Okay, Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much. Mr. Tilewa, I would like you to respond to a point articulated a moment ago by Mr. Chukwu. But before you do that, let us introduce another guest who has just joined us in our studios again, another regular face on Good Morning Nigeria, Dr. Obadiah Melafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Dr. Melafia, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Good morning. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Okay, now to return to our Lagos Network studios, Mr. Tilewa, Mr. Chukwu was saying, or seemed to be suggesting, that we should look at the quantum of non-performing loans in a broader context to say that what has led to the spike in non-performing loans obviously is related to the recession. From your perspective, is this necessarily the case, or should we be worried about the 40% that is said to be the aggregate of non-performing loans traceable to insiders in the banking industry?
Well, we should be worried about everything. If you have 1.85 trillion naira worth of bad loans in the system, and 40% of those loans are traceable to insider-related credits, then it is a cause for concern. And this is nothing new. The NDIC has been talking about this for quite a while. There was an issue last year, June, and they've been talking about this because at the end of the day, it's quite interesting that this is coming from the Deposit Insurance Corporation, because they are the ones that insure the depositors' funds. And if anything happens, they are the ones that will have to pay out. So my own curiosity is the fact that we haven't really heard much from the central bank. Going back to your point, the issues at hand is that apart from the fact that the recession, which we have been talking about for the last year, we're seeing the direct impact. There's a positive correlation between having a recession and having a negative GDP growth, and of course the bad loans in the system, because most of these companies, as you can see, their performance is not as good as it should be, and of course they're going to have challenges repaying their loans. But there are three particular sectors that have caused this problem: the oil and gas industry, especially the power sector loans which the banks have given, and of course aviation. But luckily, most of the aviation loans have been transferred to AMCON, and that's why you don't see much of an impact. So clearly, there's a direct correlation between the recession and non-performing loans in the banking system. There's no question about that. But the issue is the fact that what are the regulators doing about it? The central bank, have they done the stress test on the banks to know which banks are okay and which banks are not okay? And I think, as Johnson has said earlier, you can't just put everything on the industry, because some banks might be worse off than the other. So you need to do a stress test and know which banks are okay and which banks are not okay, so that you don't have a systematic problem. And for me, this is the point of being proactive. My own concern is that this noise is coming from the NDIC. It really shouldn't be. The central bank, which are the key regulators of the banks, should be coming out to tell us they've done all the stress tests on the banks and seen how this has happened. I had an experience of going in to take over a bank that was distressed, which the central bank took over, and it took 2 very hard years to be able to turn this bank around and to eventually sell it to another bank. It's not a very pretty time, and those sort of exercises, believe me, we do not need this sort of systemic failure within the banking system at this critical time when we're in a recession. So clearly we have to take a look at all these aspects, not only from the perspective of the insider loans, which is a concern, but as Johnson has said, we have to take a look at it from the broader perspective, and then from the point of the Central Bank of Nigeria, we need to hear from the central bank. They need to be able to restore confidence, to tell us that they've conducted stress tests on every one of these banks, and let's understand that each of these banks are okay. Stress tests, as you know, is something that is done regularly. And even a bank as big as Deutsche Bank has consistently failed its stress tests. But what the regulators in those countries have been doing is the fact that they know that Deutsche Bank might not be on sound footing, but they're putting measures in place to be able to shore up the bank and to be able to restore confidence in the system with not only the depositors of those banks, but also the general public at large.
Right, Mr. Tilewa Adebayo, thank you. And unfortunately, the NDIC, both the NDIC and the CBN failed to respond or oblige us our invitation for this program. But luckily, we do have a former, of course, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Badayami Lafia, here with us, so probably would help us to clear some of those issues. First of all, why should depositors, be wary of the quantum of insider or related, loans? And secondly, I do also know that the CBN requires the banks to provide, it with yearly reports of loans, interest from particular branches, within particular bank. Where did the slip come from the CBN?
Well, first of all, I would say that there's no cause for alarm. We should be very calm, because we can actually talk ourselves into a stampede in the banking system. And at the risk of, I don't like to be seen or thought to be criticizing my former colleagues all the time. We need to be calm, because over the last 10 years, we haven't had a banking collapse. And this is also kudos to what the CBN has actually done. There's a financial stability board that meets very regularly, and they produce quarterly reports. There could be some gap in communicating this information to the public, I think this is what may have happened. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt. But secondly, of course, we should be very concerned because, you know, reaching almost 2 trillion, it is quite a challenge. The last time that it happened, AMCON had to come in and humongous amounts of money were used for bailout. That creates the problem of moral hazard, that sometimes once you've done this and they know that they can get away with it, chances are they'll try to do it again. So this is really where we must try to confront the problem of moral hazard so that banks know that they must take responsibility. Now, there is nothing wrong with insider loans in itself, okay? When I used to work for the African Development Bank, it was actually part of the benefits of working in a huge bank like that, that you were entitled to loans, in fact, at 0% interest. And everybody paid it back. I mean, it can never be heard that you, as an insider, took a loan and failed to pay it back. Now, any director who does that, in my own humble opinion, ipso facto, has failed in his fiduciary responsibility as a director of a bank. Now, it is said in the language of military science that, that war is too important to be left to the generals. I would say the same thing, that banking is too important to be left, you know, freely in the hands of bankers. You can be sure they are going to make a big mess of it if there's nobody there to check them. So it was said by Roosevelt that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I would say that all the supervisory regulatory authorities should wake up. We must see into the problem, and I agree with what has been said before, that there's nothing wrong in principle, so long as at every time, whoever takes those loans, it must be expressly written in their financial accounts, and that information must be sent to SEC and to the stock exchange as a matter of routine. Let investors, let depositors know who is taking loans and how much. And also, we must raise the veil for certain big loans. Lawyers talk about raising the veil of identity for a limited company, because in the last time, one banker was using even the name of her housemaid, giving billions of naira in loans to her housemaid who didn't even know she had taken those kinds of loans. But of course, when you lifted the veil, you discover that she was the one that was taking the loans, not the housemaid. All that.
In that instance, sorry to interrupt you, what would have happened? Because there was supposed to be a committee, a credit committee within the bank that, you know, appraises, you know, the status of, you know, the person who wants to obtain the loan, and passes, you know, to the committee that is superintended by the MD.
Exactly.
So wherein lies the lacuna? What happened in that instance?
Well, it is clear that the system failed, and that if you have a very dominant MD or chair of a board, they can hoodwink everybody and bamboozle everybody into submission, into not asking questions. So the system needs to be changed such that the committee responsible for recommending these loans should either be the audit committee or something like that, that normally is statutorily outside the control of the board, and they can report independently to the authorities, that is CBN, NDIC, Stock Exchange, Security and Exchange Commission, and all those things. So we need to tighten the system. And also the level of collateral assets must be expressly shown. And also, to be honest, any director that fails to pay back a loan, the stringency of their commitments must be stronger than that of any other person. You are in the board, okay, and you are failing to pay a loan that is supposed to keep the organization going. definitely that such a person has failed in their duty and they should resign as a director of the board. And of course, if they are directors, some of them are not even directors, so they're GMs and so on. Anybody who cannot service their loan has failed and is deemed to have resigned. And of course, they should go after them and recover those loans.
All right, Dr. Melafia, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. To return to Dr. Adewale, Head of Banking and Finance at the University of Jos, still with us at our Jos Network studios. Now, three broad areas have been identified as the sources of credit exposure by the banking subsector: oil and gas, power, as well as aviation. Now, what does this say? I mean, is it just the question of poor risk assessment of these subsectors to which credit was extended, or the fact that there appeared to have been some collusion? How could it be that you have 40% of non-performing loans exposed to these various subsectors? If they were insiders, were they self-dealing?
Okay, thank you. We know that we have systemic problem. We have problem with the economy, which of course we are addressing, and of course which we expect that there's going to be improvement. But the problem is in terms of measurement and what we do when we identify that there are problems. Just like it's been said, let me quickly reiterate, there is no problem with having insider loans. Actually, Section 18 of the BOFIA 1991 provides that no officer of the bank, no director, no manager of the bank should have interest in any credit, facility, loans, advance, and if he has interest, he should declare the nature of the interest to the bank. That is one area. Another area is in terms of prudential regulations. What do you do as a bank when you know you have such? Of course, it puts you under a stronger responsibility. Responsibility in terms of monitoring. Responsibility, of course, we know what the self-preservation theory is. If you are going to superintend over loans which you have given to yourselves in one form or the other, chances are that you might not book those loans at comparable rates with the market. And that would call to question issues of transparency. And that will further compound the systemic problem we have in the economy. So it's not really a problem. Actually, because of information asymmetries, for less developed countries like we are, sometimes if things are done properly, it might even be better for you to know who you are giving your credits to because you have a hold on them. But the problem is, what do we do? Just like it's been said earlier. If we now observe that there are problems, whether it's in aviation, whether it's in oil and gas, whether it's in energy, if we know that we have problems, how do we address those problems? Where does regulation come in? What will CBN do if it's discovered that this problem is becoming endemic? Now, Section 44 of the BOFIA provides what to do where you have problem with non-performing loans arising from insider lending. How many directors or managers of banks have we been told had their shares sold in order to pay back non-performing loans? How many? Also, there is a penalty if you do not disclose. That's Section 18, subsection 2. Penalty if you contravene. Upon conviction, 3 years imprisonment or 100,000 naira fine. How many of such have we seen? So the point is, yes, we have systemic problems, but what do we do when we see that there are? I've heard cases where we talk about trying to review the laws. Yes, there are some laws truly that we should consider reviewing. For instance, if you look at Section 18, subsection 6 of BOFIA, it provides a window where banks could somehow hide under, not to disclose some of these loans. Because it says if the bank figures out that these loans or the position of the director or manager is immaterial in that outside company, then they may not actually disclose. And it also says if the shareholding of that director is less than 5% in that outside company, Again, we know because of information asymmetries, we know these are some areas ordinarily that shouldn't be a problem, but because of our level of development, we know that we do have problem with records. And sometimes we do have problem with issues relating to transparency. So we need strict rules, and when these rules are there, we need to be able to apply them. And not only apply them, we should be seen to be applying them, so that will instill confidence in investors, in people, looking at the industry. And that will also serve as a starting point to also address issues of loan losses from other sectors or in other sectors that are not even insider dealings. So clearly there's a systemic problem. There's no problem with having insiders take loans. Sometimes it's even better you give to insiders, but then follow what the law says and follow what prudential guidelines. Guidelines stipulates what kind of reports to give to central bank. Again, there are some of those guidelines that we may also need to review and strengthen. Interest rate, for instance, it's not clearly stated that you should specify what interest rate you have given out those loans. A few banks in last year financials disclosed the interest rate that they gave to directors. And funny enough, those banks that disclosed gave average interest rate of less than 10%. And they went further to say that these interest rates were comparable with market rates. Yet Central Bank of Nigeria told us that for that same period, the minimum prime lending rate was about 18% and the maximum was about 28%. But we had banks telling us that less than 10%, which they gave to insiders, were market rates. And of course, many other banks did not even do that. They did not even report anything. So I think we need to harmonize this issue of reporting. We need to monitor. There will always be issues. But once we have clear guidelines on how to address those issues when they come up, I think we can start from there. We can.
Dr. Adewale, it's good you talked about the interest rate. Now, of course, we are told that the insiders get, of course, these loans at single-digit interest rates. Now, is this not part of the issue that we are dealing with, issues of equity and justice? And is it fair on the depositor whose money gets expropriated?
Clearly, it's an issue, and I think it's also an issue for the credit policies in various banks. And that is why each bank should also be mandated not only to have credit policies and to review them at intervals, but should also make clear statements on what to do when it comes to insider credits. Because chances are, just like I said, self-preservation theory. Chances are that you want to give yourself the best terms. And there are problems. And look at the statistics. You will see that what is happening is that most banks prefer to give their loans to their own insiders. If 40% of non-performing loans are attributable to insider credit, then you can imagine the percentage of the total loans that are actually attributable to insider credits. And of course, these insiders will always look inwards, because if a director in Bank A goes to Bank B to look for credit, chances are that he's also going to compete with directors in Bank B for credit, so he would rather give himself the credit in his own bank. So that's an issue. Transparency, and it distorts the money market. When you give credit to some people in a particular industry at less than 10%, and usually they have the bulk of the credit in that industry, and then you also have those other people who are not insiders, and you are giving them at rates close to 3 times what you have given to those who are insiders. Of course, it distorts the money market. And of course, like you said, it is not, I won't say if it's fair or not fair, but it's not appropriate, and it raises question of transparency.
All right, Dr. Adewale, thank you very much. But I would like our 2 guests at our Lagos Network studios to speak further on the issue of the distortion in the money market. Both Mr. Johnson Chukwu and Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, we've had you on the program in the past. We've talked about, the interest rate in the economy, how this is a disincentive, to borrowers as well as, others who would like to hop in for credit and then, seek to expand their business. Here we are hearing stories of insiders getting loans at single digits, whereas every other person else is getting a double digit. Plus, the sectoral allocation. We look at the sectors to which credit has been extended mostly, and we hear power, aviation, as well as oil and gas. The SMEs have not been mentioned. Agriculture has not been mentioned. Automobile industry has also not been mentioned. Is this, Mr. Tilewa, from your perspective, and Mr. Johnson as well, is this a cause for serious concern, and what should be done almost immediately to begin to correct this asymmetry?
Maybe I will take the issue of the sectoral allocation, and maybe you can address the issue of the interest rates. I think one of the challenges we have is that for most of the banks, a lot of the banks had a disproportionate amount of their portfolios in dollar-based. Most of these loans, a lot of them were in dollars, and it was a disproportionate amount of their loan portfolio that was in dollars. When the crisis started with the foreign exchange and the foreign exchange was no longer available, a lot of these banks had challenges to be able to service these loans and make their repayments. So you had the problems of the dollar liquidity, and they had challenges with their exchange rate management. And unfortunately for them, most of these loans were concentrated in the oil and gas industry. And with the falling oil prices, it had a negative impact on their loan portfolios. So consequently, a lot of them had financed a lot of exploration activities in the oil and gas sector, and consequently, they're paying the prices now. And the central bank really cannot adjust because there are no hedging instruments. So the banks have had to manage that, manage the dollar liquidity challenges to be able to see how they can pay their loans. So that precipitated a lot of the crisis in the beginning. And most of these bad loans, as you can see, significant amount of them are in oil and gas. And I think, as we've said earlier, we can see the overconcentration. So the sectoral issues are not new, but what we must understand is that there's not going to be another AMCON. The government right now can no longer afford an AMCON, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a political perspective. So again, that issue has to go back to the Central Bank of Nigeria. And the problem I've always had with the Central Bank is that when you have people who are former managing directors or executives of banks regulating, it's like the fox guarding the chicken coop. Is there a bit of compromise here? And that is where you have the challenges. Because really, for me, it's about managing this information. All this we've talked about today, there are clear rules, regulations, and guidelines to be able to solve the problems we have. But the problem, as I said earlier, is that Deutsche Bank is a massive bank, and Deutsche Bank has failed a stress test. And Deutsche Bank is a systematically important bank in Europe and globally. But the way both the US Reserve Bank and the European Central Bank have managed this crisis restores confidence with everybody all around that this crisis is being managed. Here, you find a situation whereby the NDIC is the one that is making this complaint. The central bank has not responded, and they have not told us what the situation is with the stress test and all that. So while we might have this situation on a sectoral basis and an issue, it's a question of how do you manage the crisis? How do you communicate and restore confidence to the system? So there's nothing wrong with what's going on. Everybody understands it. It happens everywhere. When there's a recession, of course, oil prices fall, recession happens. We understand that economies go around in cycles. You cannot expect that you will not have an impact on the loan portfolio of banks. But the question is that you have risk management systems. Most banks have upgraded their risk management systems. The central bank is supposed to have upgraded its risk management system so that we can anticipate these problems and basically we can mitigate these risks ahead of time. So it's the way we are managing these problems that's the issue. It's nothing wrong with bad loans. There's nothing wrong with NPLs. It's a part and parcel of banking. What is wrong with what we're doing is the way we're managing these issues and the way the banks are responding. And of course, the way the central bank, which is the regulator, is not responding. That is the issue.
All right, of course, Kingsley, you said John Chukwu, yes.
Yeah, Chukwu is, we expect Chukwu to respond to the interest rate disparity between insiders and outsiders.
A bank interest rate or the systemic interest rate. I think that's a slight, I want to disagree slightly from that with him. Basically, what happens is that when banks grant credit at suboptimal or sub-market rate to insiders, what the banks are doing is that they are subsidizing those insiders. And whenever there is a subsidy, somebody has to pay for the subsidy. The person who ultimately pays for such subsidy are the shareholders who would have had a shortfall in whatever would have been due to them. Because when that subsidy is granted, overall, it will have an impact on the P&L of the bank. So the profit that the bank would have made if he had charged commercial rates would not be achieved. And what the bank would end up doing is declaring dividend that is below what he would have achieved. So it is the shareholders that are actually taking the hit from that subsidy. It's the shareholder that are subsidizing the insiders. So what we need to do to address that is the interest rate that is payable or paid by the insider should be disclosed in the public account of the bank and presented to shareholders at the AGM, specifically as an item to be discussed, so that the shareholders can then now have to, even if we call it retroactive approval, or object to it. And when there's an objection to it, the shareholders will insist that the bank should refund that shortfall in interest, because the shareholder that suffer. It doesn't really have any effect on the money market. The effect is on the shareholders. And we have enough provisions for minority shareholders to seek for redress if their interest is compromised. So I think we need to take it at that level of regulation, where the regulator will now insist that rates of interest on loans extended to insiders should be disclosed to shareholders at the AGM and EGM. And such should be disclosed as an item for discussion or deliberation at such meetings. So shareholders can actually fight for their interest, because it is them that actually are paying for those subsidies that are being granted to the insiders. But extending the discussion further, the issues of this we're discussing today, which is the issue of non-performing loans, we have to look at, we have mentioned two sectors where that effect actually manifested more. And I also mentioned in my earlier intervention that this jump was too sudden, from a less than 5% to a 10%, 11.3%. I think some point it was 11.3%. And we need to ask ourselves what went wrong. One factor we also recognize that where a borrower has a non-performing loan in any bank, no bank is allowed to extend additional credit to that borrower. So it then means, if that has been adhered to strictly, it then means that the shareholders or the insiders whose credit have gone bad had not defaulted, we are not in default about 2-3 years earlier. So the default occurred suddenly. And why did the default, why is it that we are talking of a 740 billion naira now? Because if you look at the oil and gas sector and you look at the power sector, these are two instances, particularly the power sector, where the banks had a currency mismatch in terms of the source of income of the borrower was in naira, while as the loans were extended to them in dollar. So when devaluation occurred, the volume of that loans ballooned. If the loans were given for a borrower borrowed $1 million at 199, he was owing the bank 199 million. Now that loan is about 305 million, or 315 million, or 480 million, whichever exchange rate you adopt. So you have seen a sharp growth in the non-performing loan. It used to be 199 million, it's now at the minimum 305 million. So you can see why the proportion jumped up. Because one of these we need to ask ourselves that, what is the proportion of total loans extended by banks that insiders account for? So is it 40%? Is it 60%? Because that will help us get a hang on whether insider loans are disproportionately higher in terms of performance than what they are as a share of the total loan portfolio of the banks.
All right, Mr. John Chukwu, thank you. We get back now to, of course, Dr. Obadiah Milafia. Dr. Obadiah Milafia, you heard if loans that are available to the insider is skewed in favor of the insider directors, you have less remaining for the outsider. Now, what would be the implication of that?
Well, I mean, I agree to some extent with what the last two speakers said, of course, it means that less will be going to other creditors or potential creditors in the future. But also, I suspect that a lot of these insider loans are not really used for productive purposes. Maybe that is why they are having much more difficulty in being able to pay it back. And, but we need to also remember that there's a strong analogy between commercial banking and atomic physics. Atomic physicists can produce energy out of almost very little. They can produce humongous amounts of energy. And the same thing with commercial bankers. You know that you can give somebody a billion naira loan with almost nothing inside the bank. It's a paper transfer, okay? I write that I've given you a loan, I've given you a loan of 1 billion, and I really don't have 1 billion in my account. But of course, your account is credited with that amount of money electronically. And of course, you can transact business, you can issue loans, and so on and so forth. If you want a bit of cash, it can still be given to you. So banks routinely create money a lot out of thin air. You know, that is why they must be properly and rigorously supervised to make sure that they're doing the right thing. The other thing I want to say is that we need an overall transformation in the mindset and in the practice of commercial banking in this country. In the past, some of us who were school kids, university students, you know, you go to your bank manager and, you know, you're fantastic people. No matter how small, no matter how big, they treated you with respect and everything. Today, I am sorry to say that we have a lot of cowboys in the system. In fact, these days, you don't go to a big party and introduce yourself as a banker because their dignity has been lost. Their honor seriously has been lost. They've been seen as cowboys who are not particularly people of high integrity, and it makes me very sad. We need to go back to that old and time-tested professional ethics. If you cannot trust your banker as much as you can trust your priest or your lawyer, then you have a very serious problem. Ironically, nobody trusts their bankers today. A lot of them, and I've heard stories and know people, one businessman who actually committed suicide because once they saw that his business was very good, the loan he took, they decided to just double the rate of interest because they wanted to take over his bank. I know of another case, somebody who bought a fantastic mansion during the government, you know, civil servants, you know, and so on. And some of the, maybe people in the bank decided they wanted that house. Independently, they will bring surveyors to come and survey the value of the house. And then, no, because they wanted to take it over, so they increased the interest rate, they tripled it and quadrupled it, knowing fully well that he will not be able to pay. So, that, in fact, they even brought people to buy. They look, why are you wasting this house? We can buy it. He said, no, I don't want to sell it. They were pressuring him until he now had to go and get money from some Samaritans and pay them off so that he can offload their wahala. This is not banking. This is cowboy approach. This is iniquity. This is Shylockism. It's not banking. And we need to weed out this kind of cowboys in the banking system and put real professionals, real gentlemen and women who understand what banking is and can do it properly in the interest not only of the shareholders, but in the interest of our country as a whole.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your perspectives. We're not ending the conversation just yet. There are viewer reactions already by way of tweets that have come in through our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Just before we take some of the tweets, while we are taking the tweets as well, I would like our guests, you know, to probably ruminate over what I'm about to say now. One of the three sectors to which the credits have been exposed, oil and gas, power, as well as aviation. Let's take power, for instance. There are three critical elements in power. You have generation, you have transmission, and then you have distribution. To which of these three segments were they exposed? Are we building new power plants? Is it the GENCOs? or is it the discos, or is it TCN, which is government owned? Central Bank on its own had also provisioned, some quantum of money for the power sector. So which money were the banks now extending, to the power companies? So that's one area that we can take a look at. We have seen what has happened in the aviation subsector, but oil and gas as well. What is it that we are seeing in oil and gas? We also saw this when the banks in 2008, 2009, when oil prices were very high, they overexposed themselves at thinking that, oil imports would continue, and then the prices came down. So what kind of risk assessment do they undertake before they start extending these credit facilities? Probably the cowboy phenomenon is one thing that Obadiah Melafia would speak to for the remainder of the
Kingsley,
program.
I think they should just take it briefly so that we can just run through the tweets. Yes.
All right. So let's know, Claire, what's our producer is indicating that, look, let's also hear from our viewers. Festus Akimboyewa tweets, insider lending promotes corruption. Now, when some bank directors lend to themselves and their cronies, they know the loans will not be repaid.
And Agbe Oladega, I think, says insider lending goes at ridiculous rate. Customers are ripped off daily by frivolous charges and deductions.
And then Akimboyewa again, insider lending should be outlawed to ensure fairness and protect Nigeria from failures in the banking system.
And change to progress, some of your guests are talking about recession. Now, these elites collected the loans before 2016 recession. Why didn't they pay before? And also, he tweets, one of the elites collected 11 billion naira loan 9 years ago. That was before recession, now, but did not pay back anything for 7 years before AMCON took over.
And then we have this from Muhammadu Ibn Isa. It tweets, the banks once represented us, the masses, as honorable middlemen, but right now the banks are tools of our imperial masters.
And Festus Akimboyewa tweets, government should compel bank directors to collect all past due debts through insider lending or be prosecuted for financial crime.
And Ayuk tweets, the economy of Nigeria is more affected by its monopolistic approach. Efforts to boost the private sector should be the way out.
And Livingstone tweets, until offenders are prosecuted, insider lending will not stop. You can't police what you are guilty of.
And Dele Jack Solomon, absolutely, insider lending by bankers is affecting the Nigerian economy. Former CBN governors Soludo and Sanusi exposed these acts. All right, so those are the tweets that we are taking in the meantime. Those are the issues that I put on the table before we took the tweets. Of course, we will have our guests respond to them after this break.
Originally, I just carry myself like this. I don't turn agent.
Why has one of the world's friendliest occupations become such a nightmare in the hands of some people?
You be talk of town. Say now you be the latest agent we dey in town now.
Why has the circle of lies become the smartest thing?
You go give me 3 bay first. That one are for consultation fee.
Here.
You give me another 2 bay. Now finding fee we dey call am.
Here.
You give me 1K.
Are we going for excursion?
That one are for the excursion fee. You too sharp.
Professor John Bull, this week's episode of your rib-cracking comedy, Estate Agent.
Come on, this thing wey be like shrine address for inside my hotel. The person wey dey teach me this job, the person you all know. You all what? You all pass me? Where president is there so rock. Now I buy am.
And showing at 8:30 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday on NTA Network International and Star Times.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
Welcome to the new speed of life.
Okay, sir. You may now go in for your interview.
Thank you.
Ah, my shoe. And to think I just bought this very expensive foreign shoe 2 months ago.
So sorry about your shoes. This is why I advise my friends to always patronize made in Nigeria products. See this shoe. It's made in Nigeria and I've had it for 2 years and it's still as good as the day I bought it.
Made in Nigeria products are good quality, and stringent government regulations and certification now mean the goods made in Nigeria meet international standards. Make the patriotic choice today. Buy right. Buy Made in Nigeria. This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
The attention of the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, SGF, has once again been drawn to the nefarious activities of some criminal elements in the society who have devised yet another devilish method of defrauding unsuspecting members of the public by impersonating the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Engineer Babachir David Lawal. They seek monetary gratifications from their victims who, as usual, they are sure of employment in the public service or outright political appointments. Department of State Services, DSS, and other security agencies have been informed and are working assiduously to curb the occurrence of this ugly phenomenon. Some culprits have indeed been apprehended. For the avoidance of doubt, some of the numbers they used are as follows. Members of the public are therefore hereby advised to be aware of fraudulent callers impersonating the SGF and indeed other top government functionaries. The general public are once again reminded that the federal government of Nigeria has established verifiable channels of communicating with individuals, groups, and organizations. If in doubt, contact the press unit, Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Shehu Shagari Complex, Abuja, for clarifications on all matters of public concern. Bolaji Adebiyi, announcer.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Just before we took the tweets and then went on the short break, I was asking our guests to first ruminate over some of the points I talked about, in particular, interrogating the credit policy of the banks with regard to their exposure to some of the sectors that we just mentioned. Oil and gas, the example we saw in 2008, 2009, when prices were higher, and then suddenly prices came down. And what we are seeing, or what is being said to have occurred in this time around, credit extension to the power sector. Where in the power sector? Is it generation, is it distribution, or is it in transmission? And how does that square with the quantum of funds that were housed with the CBN for onward borrowing or onward extension to the power sector? Let's get the closing thoughts on this now from Dr. Adewale from our Just Network Studios.
Okay, thank you. I would put it to the credit policies of banks. You should have a robust policy. And I know that some banks have done fairly well in terms of how they manage the process that leads to that decision to give credit, and also to make sure that there are adequate provisions for recovery. Credit should not necessarily be an issue of something you want to go into and quickly come out with huge profit. You need to appraise properly. You need to appraise very strongly, and you need to change your yardsticks from time to time. And that is where monitoring comes in. I think the major challenge that many of the banks have had is in terms of not appraising properly, not really understanding the dynamics of the industry, especially when you are going into something new. You need to be very careful. You need to go in a way that you will have an exit plan. You need to go in a way that depositors' funds are adequately secured, so that there will be a way to move out if you have to move out. You have to go in and make sure that the parameters you have are such that would not also kill the credit in terms of interest rate. So you need to be very pragmatic in terms of your terms, in terms of the conditions that you package the credit, whichever industry that you are looking at. I think that's a major challenge that we have with the industry. Like I said, some banks have done fairly well. They've done quite well. And these are some of the top banks we still have now. So what have they done is in terms of packaging these facilities. But where we have a lot of influence coming from both within and outside the bank, then it's a challenge. Again, where you also have influence, or where you have a challenge where banks have to come together to work together, and some of these banks may not really have uniform standards in terms of credit monitoring and so on. That could also be a challenge. And if the underlying transaction is not sustainable or is not profitable to the banks, then definitely there's going to be a problem. Just like in the energy sector. I know as far back as 2015, we're looking at about 5 trillion of loans that were not being serviced properly. And that, of course, is very significant. As at then, that was about 40% of the total loans in the industry as at that period. So we have a situation where we need to appraise credits very well and make sure that we follow all the guidelines and make sure we review these guidelines from time to time.
Dr. Clement Adewale, Head of Department Banking and Finance, University of Jos. Many thanks to you. And we move over to Lagos. Mr. Johnson Chukwu, just in less than a minute, your response, please.
Okay, I would add to what Clement has said. Beyond the issue of credit approval process, there's issue of the obligor himself or the obligor, the company that is borrowing. What's their performance? What's their track record? What's their credit payment records? So you have to look at that. Then the third factor, because there are three factors that actually influence the level of non-performing loans. One is the quality of credit approval process, whether the bank kept to their risk acceptance criteria, whether they have a defined target market, whether they have also specified limits, sectorial limits, so that they don't exceed those limits, so that they don't have concentration risk. Then you also have to look at, one, the obligor, and then the third factor, the sector and the economy, where the obligor is operating, or what everybody's operating in. If you look at the two sectors that actually account for the greater proportion of non-performing loans, the oil and gas sector and the power sector. Let me dwell on the power sector. The power sector is a case where all the absorptions that underpinned the privatization of the power sector had failed. We have failed to achieve commercial market viability in the power sector. Therefore, the distribution companies are not generating enough to pay the generation companies for power supply. The generation companies are not earning enough to pay the gas suppliers. So you have situations where they cannot even cover their operating costs, talk less of meeting their loan repayment obligations. And as I mentioned earlier, remember that those loans were granted in dollar, and the value of those loans have ballooned as a result of the devaluation of the currency when their income is in naira. So you have to contend with those issues. You have issues that have to do with quality of credit appraisal. You have to do with the entire economic environment and the sector where the operators are operating. If you extend this to the upstream segment of the oil and gas sector, when the oil majors were exiting, they sold their assets to likely Nigerian investors. And most of the valuation were in the range of $70 per barrel of crude. Today, crude is still struggling at best at $56, $57 per barrel. So those that did the appraisals then were obviously making the judgment based on $120-something dollar per barrel. That's also, you can call that a judgment error on the part of the bank that granted those loans based on such valuations. But they also have to look at the fact that oil price has to come down. So you have to deal with issues of the quality of credit approval and assessment. You have to deal with the issue of the obligors, defining who to lend to, what are the track records, credit records of such borrowers, what line of business they're into, and then you have to look at how has the macroeconomic environment affected each of these sectors and affected the economy generally in determining what went wrong.
All right, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, a financial analyst, would like to thank you. Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, I know, do us the favor of rounding off under 1 minute.
Very much. This is a very simple issue. It is the Central Bank of Nigeria that is complicating the issue by not saying much. Economic cycles happen. Economies go into recessions. Oil prices drop and fall every day. It's not a big deal. The big deal is the fact that the Central Bank of Nigeria has been very quiet. The NDIC has raised an alarm. And what we're looking for is that the Central Bank of Nigeria should conduct a stress test on all the banks, and let's understand which banks are solid, which ones are not, and let's take the adequate steps to do the right thing. We've done it before, and one of the things that has happened in this country is the fact that there has never been any time in this country where any depositor has gone to any bank in Nigeria and not able to get his money. So I think we should continue at those lines, and we should be proactive and put in and activate all our risk management practices and principles. Thank you.
Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, thank you, a regular guest on this program and a financial expert joining us from Lagos. Many thanks to you, and do have a great day.
Thank you.
So you'll round off under 1 minute.
Okay, well, thank you. This is our country. We have a great country to build. Banking is a very important pillar in national development. And like I said, banking is too important to be left to bankers, just like war is too important to be left to generals. The Central Bank of Nigeria has a very key role to play in this regard. I would suggest that we need to tighten the screws around insider loan issuers. There need to be limits on how much on single obligor. There need to be single obligor limits for insiders taking loans. And I would suggest that going forward, each time an insider is taking a loan of more than 1 billion, such facility should be referred to the CBN for final approval, where greater scrutiny and greater appraisal is done to ensure that there is collateral asset for that loan and that that loan will be paid in good time. And I would still insist that if there are insiders who have taken loans for years and they have refused to pay or are unable to pay, it is deemed ipso facto that they are no longer fit to be directors and they should be flushed out.
All right, Dr. Obadiah Melafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Okay, and just before we wrap up the conversation segment, just would like to take a couple of tweets that have come in. Xavier Ekpe from Uyo. The question is, these insiders, directors, etc., are they immune? If bank CEOs were identified and dealt with according to law, can't these insiders be identified and punished accordingly?
All right, and Dele Jack Solomon tweets, it led to the collapse of the Nigerian banks as its modalities make it difficult to ascertain the true financial status of the banks.
And Festus Akimboyewa, thanks to the former CBN Deputy Governor, there are many cowboys, armchair and political bankers in our banking industry, and we need to weed them out.
All right, and Udo tweets, we should not only blame politicians for bad leadership. Nigerian bankers are the opium of economic growth, reaping without sowing.
All right, well, that does it for our conversation segment. Claire, just to indicate that sometimes some commentators would also say that it is because of the propensity of the Nigerian banking industry to finance trading rather than real development and economic growth that they have found themselves in this logjam. If you're always looking for quick profit, this is what happens. And elsewhere in corporate governance, you will say let the market for corporate control, take effect. If there are persons who are responsible for this mismatch in credit policy and risk assessment, they should face the music.
All right, Kingsley, of course, once again, we did invite CBN, but it didn't respond. I understand the NIDC responded to us late last night. NDIC, I beg your pardon, responded late last night, of course, saying that the notice was rather short.
And then shareholders we talk about. A number of these companies are listed, a number of the banks, nearly all of them are listed on the stock market, which means that you have diverse shareholders all over the place, from small to big-time shareholders. All right. So let's take our complimentary segments now, and we move on to sports.
Captain. And it's the home side that starts us off today. At the Sanya Basha Stadium, 10